It started with a call I didn't want to answer. His name lit up on my screen like a warning sign. Dad, all caps, still saved from a time when I thought he deserved that place in my phone. I stared at it long enough for it to ring out. Then it rang again. Same name, same weight. I picked up. "Hey," I said flatly. "Hello, darling," he said, that overly familiar tone reserved for when he needed something. "How are you doing?" I didn't bother answering. We both knew this wasn't a check-in. I could already hear the ask in the shape of his voice, the hesitance dressed up as concern, the pause, the sigh. I've hit a bit of a rough patch. There. It was. "How rough?" I asked, though I regretted it before the words even landed. "I'm about 2 weeks behind on rent. It's not a huge amount, just a bit tight this month. The usual nonsense. You know how it is." I didn't, actually. I paid my rent on time. I made sure my lights stayed on. I didn't go on weekend benders and then call my child to bail me out. I didn't gamble. I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. He kept talking, trying to sell it to me like he always did. "I'd pay you back by the end of next month, tops. Promise. Cross my heart." I didn't respond. "You there?" "Yeah," I said. I could feel my throat tighten. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about everything else I had already given, things he never once acknowledged. I'd paid for his car repairs last year, covered his overdraft twice. He always said it was just this once. Somehow once had turned into a permanent line item on my budget. "Thing is," I said slowly, "I can't help you this time." The silence that followed was thunderous. Then came the shift. Fast, venomous, familiar. "Can't or won't," he snapped. I stayed quiet. "I mean, for Christ's sake, I'm your father. I looked after you for 18 years. And now you're doing all right for yourself and suddenly you're too good for your old man?" I inhaled sharply. I said I can't. "No, you won't. You've always been like this, haven't you? Selfish." There it was. That word. Selfish. A bullet dressed up as an opinion. I hung up. Then I sat there, phone face down, hands shaking, heart racing. I told myself I wouldn't cry, but my eyes stung anyway. It was always the same. He asked. I gave. And still, I was never enough. But this time felt different. This time, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, but quietly, like a thread finally pulling loose. Something had to change. And maybe, just maybe, it had to start with me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing the word selfish, ricocheting inside my head like a pinball. It echoed off every memory I had of him, distorted through years of forced forgiveness. It wasn't even about the money. It was about how easily he reached for that word, like a switch he could flip to shame me into obedience. And for years, it worked. God, it worked. I used to bend over backwards just to prove him wrong. But not this time. By morning, I'd already started a spreadsheet. It began as a distraction, a quiet, controlled rebellion. One row at a time, I wrote out every expense, every favor, every rescue mission I'd pulled off in his name. Tony, 17, paid his phone bill for 3 months straight. Point 18, bought him a new mattress when he claimed his back was too bad for work. 19, covered vet bills for his dog because he couldn't let Buddy suffer. 2020, paid half his rent during lockdown even when I was laid off myself. 2021, sent him $200 when he said his card was declined at the supermarket. 2012, booked him a train to visit me for Christmas. He never showed up. I kept going, not just the money, the emotional tabs too. The calls I answered at 2 a.m. when he was drunk and lonely, the birthdays I spent alone because he lost track of time, the apologies I whispered into the mirror on his behalf. Each line on that spreadsheet was, like therapy, proof, a timeline of quiet sacrifice. When I hit the bottom of the page, I added one final row, 2025, declined a loan, and next to it, in bold, debt paid. So is my patience. I stared at the screen and felt something shift. Not satisfaction exactly, but clarity, a release. For once, I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't pacing in guilt. I was steady, done. I exported the file. titled it Everything. I paid for that you forgot, Texil SX. Attached it to an email with no subject, no body, just hit send. I imagined him opening it, scrolling, probably laughing at first, thinking I was being dramatic. But maybe, just maybe, by the time he reached the last line, he'd feel the full weight of it. Maybe not. But I didn't write it for him. I wrote it for me. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix him. I was trying to free myself. He didn't reply. Not that day, not the next, not even a sarcastic, "Thanks for the reminder." Just silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's weaponized. Meant to punish, to make me wonder if I'd overreacted, to pull me back into the loop I'd only just broken. But I didn't reach out. Instead, I stared at the empty inbox every morning like it was a test I kept passing. I even stopped drafting imaginary follow-ups in my head. No reworded clarifications, no softened explanations. Just stillness. It felt strange. Not like winning, more like detox. Like standing at the edge of something and choosing not to jump. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I finally knew what was at the bottom. On the third day, Mum called. "You could have handled it better," she said, skipping right past hello. No small talk, straight into judgment, just like him. I sat on the floor with my back against the fridge, knees pulled up, phone resting against my cheek. I didn't scream. I didn't insult him. I just told the truth, I said quietly. Exactly. The truth hurts, she sighed. You know how sensitive he is. That word, sensitive, nearly made me laugh. If he was so sensitive, why wasn't I ever allowed to be? Why was my pain an inconvenience and his an emergency? Do you even know why he asked for money? I asked. A pause. No, she admitted. He didn't say. Of course he didn't. Why ruin the chance to spin it however suited him? He's your father, she added, as if biology was the same thing as a bond. You'll regret this one day. Maybe, maybe not. But I'd spent years making decisions out of fear. Fear of guilt, fear of being labeled ungrateful, cold, dramatic, fear of ending up alone. But solitude, I was learning, was different from loneliness. It had room for my thoughts, space for my feelings, a kind of echo that didn't mock me, but met me where I stood. I'm tired, I said simply. Another pause. This one heavier. Well, call me when you've calmed down. She hung up before I could say, I already have. Afterwards, I didn't cry. I cleaned the flat. I vacuumed like my life depended on it, washed clothes I'd forgotten I owned, rearranged mugs in the cupboard. It was a small rebellion, choosing myself in quiet, ordinary ways. Because the silence from him didn't scare me anymore. It only proved my point. And the next time someone accused me of being selfish, I think I'd just nod and say, finally. It wasn't just the money. It never was. It was the years of being expected to give. The casual way he assumed I'd pick up dinner, or book the hotel, or cover Mum's prescriptions when he forgot his wallet. The way he looked past it, all like it was nothing, like I was just doing what daughters do. But daughters, apparently, are born owing. I started digging through my email for receipts, trying to build the spreadsheet not just as a statement, but as a memory. Each row, a chapter. Each transaction, a bruise I hadn't given myself permission to name. I found the time I paid his car insurance because he said, "What kind of child lets their parent walk to work?" Month 6. The groceries I sent during lockdown when he refused. To learn how to order online. 89,76. The vet bill when his dog got sick and he said he'd get me back next month. 312. He never did. And each time I told myself, it's fine, he's struggling, he's family, he means well. But meaning well had a funny way of looking like entitlement, especially when apologies never followed, when gratitude showed up hollow, if at all. When saying no once erased 100 yeses. I added the date I covered his electric bill in 2020, the birthday dinner in 2021, the time I took 3 days off work to help him recover after surgery, and he later told people I'd barely helped. listed them all, not to be petty, but to stop gaslighting myself into thinking I was imagining things. When I finished, the total was well over $3,000. That's just what I could prove. At the bottom, I added a final line. Emotional labor, unquantifiable, but consider it settled. I stared at the screen for a long time, then saved it with a new title, Everything I Paid for That You Forgot. And I didn't send it right away. Because this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't trying to make him feel as small as he'd made me feel. I just needed a moment where I was finally seen. Not as a bad daughter, not as dramatic, but as someone who had been quietly breaking under the weight of other people's needs. This spreadsheet wasn't just data, it was my side of the story, and I was done keeping it to myself. I didn't send it in a fury, no trembling hands, no heat rising to my face, just a strange sort of calm, the kind you get when you realize you don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to stop pretending everything's okay. I opened. My email typed in his name, Dad, mobile, because he never checks the main one, and attached the spreadsheet. No subject line, just a message in the body. You called me selfish. I thought I'd remind you of the math. Debt paid. So is my patience. And I hit send. There was no immediate relief, no cinematic rush of power, just a quiet flatness. Like I'd taken out the rubbish and was now staring at the empty bin, wondering why it didn't feel like more. I didn't even close the laptop. I left it open on the table and walked to the kitchen, made a tea, let it brew too long. I drank it anyway, the bitterness somehow fitting. Half an hour passed before my phone lit up. Dad, so now you're keeping score? That's cold. Yow stared at the screen, thumb hovering, deleted 3 drafts of a reply before tossing the phone face down on the counter. It was cold, maybe, but so was being expected to bend every time he cracked. So was being called selfish for drawing a boundary. So was watching the man who once promised to protect me twist that promise into guilt. That's the thing about keeping score. It only looks petty to the ones who've never paid a damn thing. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood I didn't owe him more of them. Instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and wrote, just because someone raised you doesn't mean they raised you right. And just because you were taught to give doesn't mean you owe what you never had. It was messy, raw, maybe even unfair in some places, but it was mine. I sat on the floor of the kitchen, my back against the cupboard, sipping cold tea and feeling the first edges of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not guilt. Freedom. And for once, I didn't need him to understand. That to know it was real. I didn't hear from him for a few days. Not a call, not a passive-aggressive emoji, not even one of those forwarded videos he used to send with captions like LOL as a conversation substitute. Silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. I found myself breathing deeper, noticing how quiet my flat actually was. No ticking clock, no TV buzzing in the background, just the occasional creak of the old wood floors and the hum of my own thoughts. It's funny how much room guilt takes, up when you let it, how you start trimming yourself down so the people who hurt you can still fit in your life. And once you stop doing that, once you stop shrinking, there's all this space. It's uncomfortable at first, but then it starts to feel like possibility. Champesai went for a walk that night. Nothing dramatic, just trainers, hoodie, and the city doing what it does best, pretending it's not falling apart while still glittering like it has everything under control. I liked that. Related to it, weirdly. I passed a little bookstore that had fairy lights tangled in the window and a sign that said, "Come in. You're not bothering anyone." And I did. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but I left with a secondhand poetry book that smelled like dust and salt. There was a note inside the front cover. For when the weight is too much, words will hold it with you. A stranger, probably someone soft. I held on to that like it was a small miracle. The next morning I made coffee and didn't check my phone, not to prove a point, just because I didn't want to. I read poems with chipped black nail polish and fuzzy socks, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like someone's daughter. I felt like me. Just me. It's strange, isn't it? How we're told blood is everything. That family means unconditional love. But no one talks about what to do when the conditions are silence, manipulation, and shame dressed up as jokes. He used to say, "Don't air dirty laundry." I used to think that meant keeping things inside. Now I think it means wash it. Hang it out. Let the world see you're done carrying the stink of other people's mess. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. And tired people stop making space for storms that never change direction. I didn't mean to start the spreadsheet that day. I opened Excel to budget for groceries, maybe figure out how long I could stretch my salary before payday. But somewhere between utilities and rent, I clicked into a new sheet and typed Dad. Just that. One word, a heading. Then below it, dates, amounts, and half-forgotten reasons. 14, $230 emergency dentist bill. 2015, $60 birthday dinner for his girlfriend because he was a bit short. 2017, $500 loan for a car, down payment, never returned. 2018, $1,200 temporary help after he got laid off. Again. It went on. I wasn't even angry when I wrote it all down. Not anymore. I wasn't crying or shaking or even drinking wine like some woman in a melodramatic film montage. I was just calm, detached, almost, like I was itemizing someone else's life, someone else's sacrifices. What surprised me most wasn't the total, it was the detail. The receipts I still remembered, the colors of the bank app notifications, the words he used when he asked, "Only if you've got a bit spare, sweetheart." I'd hate to be a burden. The irony almost made me laugh. He had this way of making me feel like a hero and a disappointment all at once. Like I should be proud of being the responsible one, but also sorry for not being the generous one. And I fell for it every time. Until now. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, I added one more line. 2023, $0, request denied. Note, not selfish, just done. And beneath that, in bold, debt paid, so is my patience. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was second-guessing it, but because it was the most honest thing I'd ever written about our relationship. I didn't even need to send it yet. Just writing it down felt like reclaiming something. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the keeping, the weight of always being the one who remembers, who absorbs, who carries, while the other walks away clean. That night, I dreamt I was standing on a beach, watching all the things I'd done for him float out to sea. Not as punishment, just release. Little boats made of bills and favors and phone calls, drifting further and further away until the water was still again. In the dream, I turned and walked back up the shore barefoot, and I wasn't carrying anything. The next morning, I sent it. The spreadsheet, I mean, with no preamble, no apology. I didn't explain why, didn't offer a justification for the coldness. I just attached the file and typed one simple sentence. Here's everything you forgot. It wasn't an email, it was a statement. I knew he'd see it as an attack, but that didn't matter anymore. It wasn't my problem anymore. I wasn't the one asking for favors. I made a cup of coffee and sat down, phone in hand, waiting. Waiting for the call, or the text, or the passive-aggressive scene notification. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to hear. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. But I didn't need either of them. Not anymore. I just needed him to see it, to acknowledge that I had kept track for so long. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The phone remained silent, and my chest remained still. I stared at the screen. The spreadsheet was just a document, just a few rows of numbers and memories, but for some reason it felt like something monumental, like I'd crossed a line, and for once, the line felt like it was in my favor. When the notification finally came, it wasn't what I expected. His text was simple, short, direct. I never asked you to keep track of this. I stared at the words. They felt familiar, Like something he always said when the truth made him uncomfortable. A slight deflection. A way of absolving himself. It was almost laughable how predictable he was. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the words didn't hurt anymore. They didn't sting like they used to. Instead, I just looked at the phone and thought, you never asked me to keep track, but you also never asked for help. That was always his way, wasn't it? Asking for just enough to make me feel needed, then blaming me when I finally realized I had been the one carrying all the weight. I tapped out my reply, trying to keep it simple. I know. And then, without another word, I put the phone down. No more waiting. No more hoping for something that wasn't coming. I didn't need a response. I already had what I needed. Closure. Even if he didn't understand it yet. The next few days passed in silence. No calls, no texts. The phone remained oddly still, and I couldn't decide if that was what I wanted or not. At first, I had imagined an immediate explosion, a back-and-forth exchange of angry messages, perhaps even a confrontation. But instead, it was just nothing. And weirdly, that felt like enough. I had spent so many years running on empty, trying to fill a hole that wasn't mine to fill. Every time I'd given in, whether it was money, time, advice, it had been because I thought I was supposed to, because I thought I owed it to him. That somehow, if I gave enough, I could patch up all the things I couldn't change. All the things he wouldn't change. But the silence was a reminder that I had no obligation to do that anymore. I didn't realize how much weight had been on my shoulders until it was gone. My shoulders felt lighter, my chest unburdened. And I could breathe again. A week passed, and there was still nothing. I went about my days, working, socializing, enjoying life without the low hum of worry that used to follow me around. It was strange at first, not having to check my phone constantly, not wondering if today was the day he'd reach out again. But I adapted quickly. I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without that sense of urgency. The weekend came, and I went out for a drink with friends. It was casual, nothing special. But there, in the middle of a conversation about nothing in particular, something shifted. One of my friends mentioned her dad, the way he'd always ask for help with his bills. She laughed about how she'd had to set boundaries, how she'd stopped letting him lean on her for everything. It wasn't a story that was all that different from my own, except that her dad had at least been self-aware enough to apologize. And then, in the quiet of the bar, with a glass of wine in my hand, I realized something. I was done. Not just with him, done with the whole dynamic. Done with the constant need to prove my worth by offering help, by giving without receiving. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need him to recognize my sacrifices. All I needed was for me to be at peace with what I had done. And I was. Wasn't until the following Monday that my phone finally buzzed with a message. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I saw the name pop up, my stomach flipped. It was him. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to decide whether I should engage or not. The rational part of me knew I didn't owe him a thing, but the conditioned part, the part that still longed for some kind of closure, wanted to respond. After a moment, I typed back, "What's this about?" The reply came quickly, almost as if he was waiting for me to engage. "I need to explain myself. It's important." I let out a breath. I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need him to justify anything. I had already come to terms with it. I had already decided that whatever he said wouldn't change anything. And yet, there was a part of me, maybe a foolish part, that wanted to hear him out, to listen to whatever excuses he had prepared. I stared at the message for a few more moments before typing, "No, we don't need to talk." I hit send, and for a second my thumb hovered over the screen again, this time fighting the urge to retract the message. But no, I meant it. I didn't need his explanation. I didn't need him to apologize. What I needed was to move forward without the weight of his expectations on me. Minutes passed, then an hour, and the phone sat untouched in my hand. It felt like a finality, a boundary that had been drawn, and for the first time, I was the one who had drawn it. That evening, I went to the gym. I ran a little harder than usual, worked through a few extra sets. The exhaustion was satisfying. At the end of the workout, I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was the same, yet somehow different. There was a subtle change, an unspoken confidence in the way I carried myself. The same woman I had been, only a little more sure of who I was. I smiled, not because of any grand epiphany or profound realization, but because I had finally stopped waiting for validation from someone who would never offer it willingly. The next few days felt like a strange kind of quiet. There was no more pressure, no more guilt hanging over me, but I didn't expect things to stay calm forever. They never did. It was a Thursday when I saw the email. It wasn't a long message, just a few short lines. "I see you've sent me that spreadsheet. I can't believe you do this to me. I don't think you understand what family is." It was from Dad. I stared at the email, the words sinking in slowly. A strange mix of emotions washed over me, resentment, frustration, but also something else, relief. At least now I knew where his mind was. He hadn't even taken a moment to consider the years of unpaid debts, of empty promises. Instead, he'd chosen to place the blame entirely on me. I didn't respond immediately. I sat there, reading the words over and over, feeling them scrape against my insides like shards of glass. But then, a small voice in my head reminded me that this was the pattern, wasn't it? Always his way, always my fault. I opened my laptop and, just like before, pulled up the spreadsheet. This time, I decided to add a new row, a final entry. Emotional labor, priceless, but not for you anymore. I sat back in my chair, rereading the list, letting the weight of it settle in. There were numbers on that page that represented years of unacknowledged effort, hours spent cleaning up his messes, picking up the pieces when things fell apart. I had done more for him than anyone ever gave me credit for, and yet, the moment I stopped playing the role of dutiful daughter, I was labeled selfish. It made me realize that the real debt wasn't financial. It was emotional. And that was the kind of debt I was done paying. I clicked send on the email. I didn't even hesitate. His response, if it came, was irrelevant now. I had already made my decision. The lines had been drawn, and I wasn't going back to what I was. The next morning, I didn't check my phone immediately. I didn't let myself wonder if he would call, if he would apologize. Instead, I stepped out into the sunlight, feeling its warmth on my skin, the kind of warmth that came from within, not from anyone else. It was mine, and it always had been. It didn't take long for the calls to start. First, there was one from my aunt, then a couple from my cousin. They all came with the same message. "Dad's upset. You really hurt him." I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't interested in hearing the same tired excuses, the endless cycle of guilt that always seemed to follow these conversations. But the one that really stung came from my mother. "Why didn't you just give him the money?" she asked, her voice tired, but still carrying that familiar edge of disappointment. "You know how hard things have been for him." My stomach churned as I listened. "Hard for him? Hard for him?" I repeated the words silently, but I didn't say them out loud. Instead, I held my breath, counted to 5, and then replied as calmly as I could manage. "I'm done being the one to fix things, Mum. If he can't take responsibility for his own life, that's not my problem anymore." There was a silence on the other end, followed by a sharp exhale. "You can't keep running away from your family, you know," she finally said. "It's not healthy." "Maybe it's not healthy to stay in a place where everyone's only there when they need something," I retorted, my voice quieter now, but firm. "I'm not running away, Mum. I'm just stepping back. For good this time." Another long silence. Then, "You've changed." I didn't know how to respond to that. Had I? I thought about it for a moment. Yes. Yes. I had changed. I'd had to change. I wasn't the same person I used to be, the one who sacrificed herself at the altar of family loyalty, the one who stayed silent, who put up with the subtle digs and the criticism. The truth was, I wasn't sure I'd ever really been that person. I had just been playing a role, and now I was finally letting go. "I'm sorry, Mum, but I'm not sorry for this," I said, feeling a rush of emotion I hadn't expected. "I'm not the one who's broken. I'm just done being the scapegoat." I ended the call before she could say anything more. It felt good to speak those words. For once, I wasn't the one who had to carry the weight of everyone else's mistakes. It wasn't my job to fix them, and it certainly wasn't my job to keep pretending I was okay with it. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. I wasn't running away. I was simply choosing myself. I spent the next few days in a strange sort of calm. The chaos from the phone calls was behind me, and now I had space. Space to think, to breathe, to process. I decided to take a step I'd been putting off for years. I needed to make sure my father understood the extent of my sacrifices, not just for him, but for the whole family. The spreadsheet started as something small, something almost ridiculous. But as I typed, I realized how much I had actually done. It wasn't just the money I'd given him or the emotional support I'd provided. It was everything. The countless little things that never seemed to be acknowledged. I listed it all, from the big payments, helping him with the mortgage, paying for his car repairs, to the small gestures that never got a thank you. The gift cards for groceries when he couldn't make ends meet. The times I drove across town because he was too proud to ask anyone else. The weekends spent picking up the pieces after his failed attempts at other businesses. The moments when I pretended everything was fine, when I let myself drown in his problems because it felt easier than confronting the truth. It all went in there. Every last detail. I didn't want him to miss a single thing. Each entry had a date, a brief description, and, where applicable, the amount of money I'd spent. The numbers were staggering, but it wasn't about the numbers anymore. It was about making him see what he had taken from me. I didn't know why I thought he'd care. After all, when did he ever care about the details? But this time, I didn't care whether or not he appreciated it. I was done being the one who silently carried all the weight. I titled the file simply, "Everything I Paid for That You Forgot." It felt like a small victory, pressing send. The response came the next day. He didn't even read the whole thing, of course. That wasn't his style. But what he did say was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "I don't need your charity," he wrote. "You're selfish. It's all about you now, isn't it?" I should have been angry. I should have been hurt. But instead, I felt relief. It was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't about me anymore. It never had been. I replied with the last row of the spreadsheet, the one I'd added as an afterthought. The row that made everything clear. Debt paid. So is my patience. I pressed send and leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I felt like I had nothing left to prove. It's strange, the things that come to mind when you're no longer tethered to a person. For a while, I kept waiting for him to reach out, to apologize, to somehow make sense of the mess we'd found ourselves in. But he didn't. And that silence, it was more telling than anything he could have said. I found myself thinking back to the first time I really realized what it felt like to be let down by him. I was a teenager, around 16, and I had just graduated from high school. I remember being so proud of myself, of everything I had accomplished, of how far I'd come despite all the odds. I thought that maybe, just maybe, it would be the one time he would look at me and say, "You did good." But instead, the day of my graduation, he came home from work late, again, and handed me a crumpled envelope with a few bills inside. "Here," he said, "just put it towards your tuition." I could never explain to anyone what it felt like, to have all that hope for something different, and then to have it deflate with one simple gesture. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn that approval, but the truth was, it was never going to come, not from him. That realization was a turning point. I stopped asking for his validation. I stopped needing his approval. But even as I learned to rely on myself, I still found myself doing things for him. The constant need to fix, to help, to be the one who was always there. It was like I was trapped in a cycle of his demands, and no matter how many times I told, Myself, I wouldn't give in. I always did. But now things were different. I had done what I needed to do. I had sent that spreadsheet, and I had given him the final piece of truth. My patience was gone, and that felt good. But I didn't. Feel free, not yet. I still had to let go of the lingering doubts, the quiet voice that told me maybe I could have done more, maybe I should have tried harder. That was the hardest part, learning to walk away when you've always been the one who stayed. I spent the next few days working on myself, on trying to let go of all that guilt. I didn't need to be the savior. I didn't need to fix things anymore. And that, in itself, was more freeing than anything else. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, I saw something that made me stop. It was a photo from a few years ago, a snapshot of the two of us, taken at my cousin's wedding. We were laughing, or at least it looked like we were. I couldn't remember the moment, but I could see the smile on his face, the way his arm was around me. I saved the picture, but not because I missed him. I saved it because it marked the end of something. I wasn't that girl anymore, and I was okay with that. A few days after the spreadsheet incident, I had a message from him. I didn't open it right away. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But curiosity got the better of me, and eventually, I clicked. It was a simple text. I hope you're happy now. You've made your choice. I let out a breath, half laughing at the irony. You've made your choice, I muttered to myself. It was so typical of him to turn the tables, to make it seem like I was the one who had created this distance between us. The truth was, it had been years in the making. Years of small sacrifices that no one acknowledged. Years of shouldering responsibility. That wasn't mine. Years of watching him fall short over and over again. I stared at the screen for a while. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't pleading for a second chance. He wasn't even trying to understand. All he could do was blame me, as if that was easier than confronting his own shortcomings. I deleted the message. It wasn't that I was angry anymore. I had no room for anger. At some point, I had stopped expecting anything from him. I had started expecting more from myself, from the people who actually cared about me, from the life I was trying to build. And I realized in that moment that I'd been spending so much of my energy trying to make a broken relationship work, while I had been neglecting the one I had with myself. That text was the last straw. It was the last time I would let his words have any power over me. I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into thinking I owed him anything. I spent the next hour in a sort of quiet reflection. I went back to that spreadsheet. I had put a lot of time into it, and maybe that was silly, but it was also therapeutic, in a way. Writing out everything I had given, every little thing I had paid for, every time I had let myself be used, it was like I was finally letting it all go. I made a decision. I wasn't going to be anyone's crutch anymore. I wasn't going to wait for him to change. I had to change. I wanted peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you stop fighting battles that aren't yours to fight. I was tired of feeling like I was drowning, trying to hold up the weight of his mistakes. I had to let go. I had to breathe. It wasn't a sudden epiphany. It wasn't a dramatic moment where I threw everything away. It was quieter than that. It was the realization that, even without him, I was enough. I hadn't expected it to feel like this. So much quieter than I imagined. In the days following, the spreadsheet, there was no dramatic confrontation, no big fight. It wasn't the closure I thought I'd get, but it was the one I needed. I went about my days in a haze of calm. The tension that had once hung in the air between my father and me had vanished. There were still moments when I wondered if I'd made the right choice, but then I'd think of the spreadsheet, the things I had written out, the small sacrifices that had built up over time, and I'd realize that I had made the only choice I could make. The next time he called, I almost didn't answer. It wasn't that I was avoiding him, it was just that I had stopped being afraid of his calls. They didn't hold the same weight anymore. I wasn't waiting for his approval or validation. I wasn't looking for anything from him. But then I remembered, this was the test. This was the moment when I'd see if he had learned anything, or if it was just going to be another round of guilt tripping. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" My voice was steady, surprisingly so. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then, "I thought you'd want to talk." I almost laughed. "About what?" "About the spreadsheet. About how you've cut me off completely." I stayed quiet. He was searching for a fight, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't about to be dragged into another pointless argument. "Are you ever going to let me explain?" I paused. "I don't think you have to explain, Dad. I think you know exactly what you're doing." There was a long silence, a heavy, uncomfortable silence. I could practically hear him trying to process my words. "Fine," he finally said, his voice tight. "I guess that's it then." I wanted to say something to make him understand, to make him see that I wasn't cutting him off because I didn't care. But the truth was, I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need him to see things my way. All I needed was to take care of myself. That was the only thing that mattered. "Yeah," I said, my voice softer now. "I guess that's it." And with that, I ended the call. I sat there for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. I had done it. I had let go. It felt good, but it also felt strange. Letting go isn't as liberating as everyone says it is. It's more like shedding an old skin. It's uncomfortable, a little painful, but it's necessary. And once it's gone, you realize how much lighter you feel, how much easier it is to breathe. I kept thinking I'd feel some sort of relief, a weight lifted, but it wasn't that simple. Letting go of something, or someone, isn't a clean break. It lingers. It settles under your skin. And even though I knew I'd made the right choice, I found myself questioning if I had given him enough chances, if I'd been too harsh. But then I would look at the spreadsheet, at the cold, hard facts I had laid out, and I'd remember. He'd had more than enough chances. I went back to my apartment that night, unpacking my things in silence. The place still smelled like new, paint and fresh start. The freedom felt different now. I wasn't burdened by the thought of him trying to pull me back into his world of guilt and obligation, and for once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. I had this sudden urge to write, not about the past, not about what I'd done, but about what I was going to do next. There was a life ahead of me, a life that was mine, a life without the weight of someone else's expectations. I started typing. "I'm starting over," I wrote, "and this time, it's for me." I smiled to myself. That's all I had to do. Take it one step at a time, one decision at a time. The journey would be messy, but that's what made it real. That's what made it mine. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of finality. The clock blinked 7:30 a.m., but I felt like I'd been awake for hours. My mind was sharp, clear, and there was a kind of stillness in me that hadn't been there before. I was free. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtains to let the light in. The sun was still low in the sky, casting soft shadows across the city. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for my choices. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand. His name flashed across the screen. A text. "We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, the old reflex kicking in, but I pushed it aside. There was nothing left to say. I didn't owe him anything anymore. I took a breath, hit the block button, and moved on. I turned to the desk, the spreadsheet still open on my computer. The final row, the one that had been the last straw, stood out. Debt paid, so is my patience. I felt a pang, but it wasn't pain. It was closure. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. And that was enough. I closed my laptop and grabbed my coat. the city outside was waiting for me. For the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. It was my turn now. And as I walked out the door, I knew it was only the beginning.